Welcome to your weekly program, بالأحضان, a show with an accent for those without one. A lot of news coming out of the Middle East, probably haven't heard about it, that the General Sisi is bragging about building the longest, the biggest bridge in the world. Arab dictators love to build tall building, biggest building, and very measured institution, and they cannot build even a country. So something about tall building in Dubai, tallest building and tallest hotel. Egyptians are following with the economy is shamble. Economy is so bad, almost 40% under poverty lines. Building so many prisons. I think what should be in the Genesis book of record, which should be how many prisons that Sisi had built in the last 6-7 years. So it's just fascinating how those Arab dictators just divert attention about the collapsing of civil society, rule of laws, and are just building tall building, useless building. They've been since the pharaohs, useless building, the pyramids, useless buildings. Here we have El-Sisi building a useless canal and celebrating as he's the next pharaoh, a useless bridge. I know it's, the people not gonna feed people with cars, might solve a traffic problem, but Egypt is really in a very bad state of affair, becoming irrelevant politically and economically, and socially. People are confused. They don't know what their identity is, and the huge propaganda against Islam and Islamists and Brotherhood. Other things we haven't learned about it is the preparation of the war on Iran, and it's is this what's happening? The same scenario of threat, weapon of mass destruction, that they spot something, a boat was running in the Gulf there, and the Iraq intention and plan to attack Israel or to attack our fleet. We haven't learned anything from a disgraceful war in Iraq, which caused millions of deaths and trillions of dollars of loss. We have here, we have two guests here. We have Dr. William Beeman. He is really a professor of sociology at the University of Minnesota. He's been following the events in Iran, and actually he wrote 2 books about Iran, our relationship, the history. The first book a few years back, The Great Satan and the Mad Mullah, and the book is in the making, coming very soon, Understanding Iran, Ancient to Present. Is on far end here. Next to him in the middle we have, as you all know, Jeremy Eagers. He is now with Global, did we say Global?
Global Twin Cities.
Global, so come check it out. It's a wonderful culture event calendar. If you're really looking for something interesting to do, this is the place to go. Welcome to بالأحضان, both of you. We'll start with you, Dr. Beeman, first. You've been following what's going on, our relationship with Iran since. We don't have to go to ancient, but we should just go in the 50s with Mossadegh and the CIA toppling an elected official in Iran in the 50s, and now we have the Shah for 34 years, and then the revolution and the Hassid crisis. And our relationship with Iran is not as straightforward because we work with them, and when we were invading Iraq, we work with them. They work with us in Afghanistan and Syria and all of this. But now, why this is now, and who's behind this? Are those the same people, the new Khan that we talked about it, during the Iraqi invasion?
In the United States, it seems, has never been satisfied with the government of Iran. It's always they'd always like something better, something that the United States could gain more control over. In 1952, we overthrew the elected prime minister and reinstalled the Shah of Iran, who had been driven into exile. Then during the 1970s, we supported the Shah, who had a repressive regime. but who was very favorable toward the United States, buying lots and lots of American arms, and also working as part of the Twin Pillars policy, along with Saudi Arabia, to try to contain the Soviet Union during the Cold War, to make sure that the Soviets would not gain a warm water port in the Persian Gulf. The Iranian Revolution threw the Shah out, overthrew him, installed after 6 months the Islamic Republic of Iran, and from that point on, relations with the United States soured. And there are many people still in government in the United States who never will forgive the Iranians for having occupied the American embassy. The occupation took place because the Iranians thought that once again the United States was planning on overthrowing their government and installing a more friendly American government. After the hostage crisis was over, the United States signed the Algiers Accords, in which the United States pledged never again to interfere with the internal relations with Iran. And of course, the United States has never abided by that. And that it's been a real problem for Iranians. They believe that the United States always wants to reach in, overthrow the government, and install somebody that the United States can control, who will be a better friend. For instance, like General Sisi in Egypt.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
So,
thank you, sir.
General Sisi is a good friend of the United States, and the U.S. government would love to have somebody like General Sisi in power in Iran. But people like John Bolton, our national security advisor, have been itching, dying to try to do something that would cause the overthrow of the Islamic Republic. And their theory is that if they make life miserable enough for Iranians, that the Iranians will rise up and overthrow their own government. This is a premise that the United States has been working on for more than 15 years. It is a rather absurd premise. Iranians also know what they're trying to do. They're not foolish, and so therefore they're not rising to the bait. The current situation where John Bolton and Mike Pompeo have tried to convince the nation and convince President Trump that Iran is an immediate danger to the United States is failing. Iran is not proven to be an immediate danger to the United States. The evidence that they provided has been inconclusive. They supposedly had a picture of Iranians loading a couple of missiles onto some fishing dhows, and they claimed that this was a major threat to the United States, and our reaction was to send 120,000 troops to the Persian Gulf to meet this terrible, terrible threat.
Would that missile come to the United States border? What? I mean, the threat on what? Their fleet over there was already there, right?
There seems to be some other there seem to be some other claims that, for instance, militias that are sponsored by Iran and who are now stationed in Iraq might also threaten the U.S. Embassy or the U.S. consulate. None of this has happened. None of this is likely to happen. But it doesn't matter, because I believe, and I think many other people believe, that John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, among others, are trying to goad Iran into doing something foolish, like shooting a rocket off or something like that. And then in that case, the United States would retaliate.
Which they did. I mean, there was some shooting on some Saudis' installation and
supposedly, but again, that's inconclusive. We don't know. We have no idea.
But what is the role of? I mean, some people say this is really this a proxy war in behalf of the Saudis to hit the Iranian, and the Saudis going to finance it. So why not?
The Saudis would love nothing more than for the United States to fight a war for them. And that's what the Saudis would like us to do. They don't want to fight the war. No, they want the United States to send 120,000 American troops to the Middle East and to start a war with Iran, and then the Saudis will sit back, rub their hands, and profit.
Well, they're gonna open their bucket too. Jeremy, you know, you've been taking tours to Iran and you've been visiting Iran, and you really took another turn and actually put an effort, like millions of Americans will consume and buy into that narrative in the media that Iran is a threat. But you went there and you want to find out what the Iranians think of us. So what is the missing of all of this? What are what are the things that the Iranians wants us to know about them that is missing from that narrative?
Well, Americans know so little about Iran and what they know is wrong, so that it's hard to know where to begin. But I think one thing that many Iranians want Americans to know is that they like Americans. I think it was Stephen Kinzer, formerly of the New York Times, who said that Iran is probably the most pro-American public, has probably the most pro-American public in the Middle East. I mean, and Iranians will say, you know, the disagreements aren't, you know, between us as people, it's between our governments. You know, they tell me, some of them tell me they don't like their government, and I tell them I don't like my government, and so we have something in common. I think, I mean, Bill can probably speak to this even better than I can, but, you know, I think, you know that saying that war is God's way of teaching Americans geography? It's
crash course.
So it would be nice if we learned a little geography and a little history.
When you go to Iran, you've been there a few times, we sit with them, and they know you are an American. I'm not talking about your friends that maybe, you know, you have. Talk about when they see you in the street, in the market, whatever. What they tell you.
They're very excited to see any Western visitors, and they say welcome to my country, and they try to practice their English. And when they find out that I live in America, they're even more excited. Often it's, oh, I have a brother who's a dentist in Cleveland, and you know, it's often they say that they would like to come to America, they would like to live in America. I think one thing that often they're very distressed about is the images of Iranians in the media. They talk about the Death to America protests, and they say, you know, and they say, you know, we don't feel that way, and you know, I think they're surprised to learn that most Americans aren't really sure which is the country with a Q and which is the country with an N. And there are many Americans who don't know that Iranians are not Arabs. There are
different history, different
culture.
But that history, Dr. Beeman, it wasn't like a necessity all the time. I mean, we work with the Iranian in an invasion in Afghanistan, and so. Can we spell out when we talk about Iran, what we're talking about?
Yeah, one of the things that is really important to know is that Iran the national religion is Shia Islam. And the Shia Muslims are the majority in many other countries. In Iraq, they're the majority in Lebanon. There's a sizable number of Shia in Afghanistan, and also they're the majority in Bahrain.
Some of them in Saudi Arabia too.
And some in Saudi Arabia. Yes, that's right. As a matter of fact, I visited some Shia communities in Saudi Arabia last January. But the Zaydis, otherwise known as the Houthis, named after their leader, Houthi, al-Houthi, in Yemen, they're a branch of Shiism. So the Iranian Revolution reached out to the Shia communities around the region, and many of them were under oppression from other governments. So, for instance, although they're the majority in Iraq, they were under oppression from Saddam Hussein. So after the revolution in 1979, the government of Iran made it a kind of mission to try and support the Shia communities wherever they were. And this is one of the problems that the United States has with Iranian, quote, hegemony in the region. as they reach out to their co-religionists, the Americans believe that they're trying to take over the entire Middle East, and actually they don't get much support from the Sunni populations in the Middle East.
Or even, not all the Shias and the Arab they buy into that. I mean, there is a distinction between Shia Arab and Shias, and the idea they are oppressed. But the thing is, I mean, the Iranians are not all that innocent. I mean, they did horrible things in Syria and in Iraq, and I mean, they were part. I'm not talking about the policy of the Iranian region is very subversive too.
Well, the Iranians supported the Assad regime in Syria. The Assad regime they're also Alawites, another branch of Shiism, and so that is one of the reasons why they were supporting them. You've got to remember that the Assad regime was also supported by Russia. Yeah. And in fact, the Russian support for the Assad regime was actually greater than the Iranian support, and the reason is because the Russians have a Mediterranean seaport in Syria. That's right, and they don't want to give up that seaport. That's one of the things that they're desperate to retain. So even if Iran completely withdrew from Syria, you can bet that the Russians would continue to support the Assad regime. So it's if you listen to the American press, you'd think that it was only Iran and it was only through Iranian support that that we supported Saddam in the 1980s when Iran and Iraq were at war with each other for 8 years. So we were supporters of Saddam.
Why now? This has been going. I thought Trump won on the fact that the war in Iraq was stupid and we shouldn't be there. Now he wants to send 120,000 troops to a country that is more nationalized and more, entrenched than the Iraqis.
Well, actually, the situation is pretty interesting because I think that many of us believe that the sending of 120,000 troops was ordered by Bolton and was supported by Mike Pompeo. And Trump ran on the promise that the United States would not be involved in any more Middle Eastern conflicts. So I heard an interesting analysis that said that Trump over the weekend has said, well, we actually don't want a war with Iran. And it is very typical that when any of the members of his cabinet or his immediate staff get big headlines, and it sounds like Trump is
outshine them.
Yeah, that's right. And Trump is following them, not leading them. Then he gets really, really upset, and he turns around and completely negates what they have to say.
Is it really about Trump? I think that. What's the role of our military establishment? I mean, those are the ones who finally are gonna, wage the war.
The American military is not in favor of any kind of military engagement with Iran. They have good military intelligence. Iran has a population of 80 million. Half of them are under the age of 40, and if you think about half of them being, men. Then you have a fighting force of potentially 15 to 20 million people,
and a militia that can be armed.
And a militia that they're very well trained, and the United States in a regional conflict with Iran would completely lose. They're not the same. They're 4 times the size of Iraq, and we had a very hard time in Iraq.
It's a different ball game over there.
Absolutely,
Jeremy. I mean, you've been there. How the economy, how people living? Seems they've been under sanction for many years. So how this affecting?
Well, I think the nuclear agreement never really brought the kind of relief from sanctions, or at least the economic boost that the Iranians were hoping for. But now. The new round of sanctions seems to be much tougher, much harsher than the previous sanctions, and people are starting to feel it. I have one friend whose husband lost his job. I've heard stories about people who, like craftspeople, who rely on some foreign ingredient, imported ingredients to make their their fabrics or and the cost of those has gone up manyfold. And so I think the economy has been tough for quite a while, and it's getting tougher. People are feeling the squeeze. As a tourist, you don't really notice it so much because the restaurants are still full.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think Iran is really hoping for more tourism to kind of fill some of the gap created by the decrease in oil
Other
sales.
people over there, their concern or their conversation different than Iranian community here in the United States?
I mean,
We don't have a huge community here in Minnesota.
the Iranian community in Minnesota seems to be very diverse in terms of their politics, in terms of who they support, and actually, so are the Iranians that I met in terms of.
Well, most of the Iranian, they left after the Islamic Revolution, so they're not fond of what the government.
Well, actually, I was surprised, but the Iranians here, I'd say for the most part, are not fond of their government, but there are Iranians in the diaspora who do support their government, or who at least...
Well, if they are under attack, we're going to support
It's
them.
not, or they don't want the Shah, they don't want, or the Shah's son. The one thing that everybody seems to agree, or almost everybody agrees on, is that they don't want the MEK. This is that cult that actually sided with Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq War.
What's the status there?
They are, I think they're mostly living in Albania, but they've passed out millions of dollars to American politicians,
including John Bolton, by the way.
And Rudy
absolutely.
Giuliani.
John Bolton met with them a year ago, and he more or less promised that the government of Iran would be overthrown and that they would be ruling Iran.
Tell us a little bit about how this group, the splitter and left, and they fought with Saddam. Who are they?
Well, it goes way back, all the way to the Iranian Revolution. And it's a bit of a long story. I'll try to make it short.
Well, you wrote a book.
The Iranian Revolution really consisted of three groups that were opposed to the Shah. Mm-hmm. The first were secular nationalists who had been around since the Constitutional Revolution in 1909.
Yeah.
The second group were what we call Islamic Marxists.
Yeah.
And that was the Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, and the Fedayeen Islam. They no longer exist. But then the third group were the religionists, were Khomeini and his group. And for 6 months, after the Shah left, these three groups kind of fought it out to see who was going to be the winner and who was going to actually take over the country. The secular nationalists were ousted and some were executed.
Slaughtered,
and Khomeini's group essentially won, and the MEK was exiled in Iraq. So they were protected by Saddam. They had a compound in Iraq, and they have always thought that they were going to come back to Iran and they were going to be the next rulers of the country.
So after Saddam was ousted and they lost, what was their political or status
The
now?
United States protected them. There was a real worry on their part that they were going to be that they were going to be executed, or because the Shia community in Iraq did not like them. So that's why they are mostly living in Albania. They're living outside the country now. They have a strong presence in Europe, and they
political
and they were as a result of their lobbying American politicians. Their status as a terrorist group, because they had actually killed Americans in the past.
Fighting with Saddam.
Their status as a terrorist group was rescinded, and so now they're no longer officially a terrorist group from the standpoint of the United States.
Now we're focusing on the brotherhood.
And so we gave them money. Our government gave them money under George W. Bush. So they're receiving. They set up. They actually set up an office in the office of Senator Brownback of Kansas before he became governor of Kansas. He was one of their protectors. Ileana Ross-Lehtinen in Florida was one of their protectors. And they generally have the ear of many American politicians who really think that they are going to be, if we can get rid of those mullahs, that the Mujahideen are going to be the rulers of Iran.
So nobody talks about the Iranian collusion and all about Russia. You do your tour. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's the nature of this tour? Anybody interested will find out?
Sure. I'd been to Iran 3 times in the last 3 years. I actually have dual citizenship and a German passport, which makes it much, much easier to go to Iran. But this year I decided I wanted to start offering tours, and I spread the word around. And I had, for this first tour that just concluded a couple of weeks ago, we went for 2 weeks. I had a group of 7. We traveled all over the country. Americans can visit Iran, but they have to go with an approved guide and an approved itinerary. And so I worked with a travel agency in Shiraz, and we found a terrific guide whom I'm hoping to work with again. People had a great time, as I said before.
You survived it.
We survived. Not only did we survive, we ate well. We saw spectacular
good food.
Scenery.
The mullah know how to eat.
They do that. We saw archaeological, some of the UNESCO World Heritage sites like Persepolis and like the mosques in Isfahan.
That's a long, huge, exciting history.
Yeah, 2,500 years or
That's
longer.
Right. Or longer.
And a history of tolerance that goes back that far. So I already have something like 30 people who say they want to go with me if I go again in October. And
wonderful.
So if
well,
anybody out there is interested, track me down.
If you can go to the global Twin City, you can find more information about these tours.
Let's see.
You have your contacts there.
I should, I
so
think there's some way of contacting me there.
Thanks so much, Dr. Beeman.
Most welcome.
Pleasure to have you here. We're talking about the war on Iran. Are we stupid enough to do it one more time? Who's behind this war? Is the Saudi playing a role of proxy war? Saudi cannot fight. They cannot buy love. They cannot even buy war. So let's see what happened. Bolton and I don't know what this guy standing behind his mustache. He wants to mess everything here. And it'll be interesting to see how the Trump administration is going to survive this, why the Democratic Party is not making this an election issue. The fact is, this guy want to drag us to a much worse war in the Middle East. We'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum and God bless you all.